Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody is okay today. It's lovely and sunny here today, and the grass cutters are going mental. So I'm hoping that wherever you are in the country, you've got some nice weather. So today we are here to talk about and answer your questions on how training can generate revenue in your small business. Now, at the moment, with cost of living crisis, cost of things going up, it's really important, especially for small businesses, to try and maximise as much as possible how much revenue that their teams can help. Now, it doesn't have to be necessarily with sales. There are various different ways in which you can maximise revenue with training. Because if you do so, for example, customer service training, you get those people coming back to you. So we've got the lovely Pete Fullard with us today. And he is it still CEO?
Oh, yeah. I answer to most things.
Yes. So CEO of Upskill People. So I'm just going to hand over to Pete for a second just to introduce himself. And then after that, we will dive straight into the questions.
Thank you very much, Kate. It's very nice to be here and have such interesting questions to answer, hopefully. As Kate mentioned, I'm CEO of Upskill People. The clue is a little bit in the title of what we do. We're an online learning business, and we have a platform with a whole range of courses from legislation to sales, service, and particularly management skills. And I guess our forte is blending what we do in with whatever else companies are doing and measuring the outcome. That's very key to us.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we've worked together for a couple of years, really, isn't it?
Yeah, a couple and a few more. I still had a little bit of colour in my hair then, I think.
Yeah. You had colourful shirts on as well, if I seem to remember correctly. Right, let me just start the presentation so people can see. So obviously, we've done that bit, so you know who Pete is. At the end, there will be contact details for Pete. So if anyone wants to connect with him or ask him any further questions, then you'll be able to at the end. So let's get cracking and go to our first question, which is, what are the most effective and cost-efficient methods for delivering training to small businesses with limited resources? What do you think, Pete?
Well, I have to say, although books some people think are dead, I and my team are permanently reading a book. And what we tend to do is we'll read the book, whether you're doing it on Kindle or on your iPad or good old-fashioned paper. We tend to find that is probably arguably the most cost efficient because they're as cheap as chips, literally. So we then, if we find a book that we like, we'll share it or we'll share the highlights of it. So I wouldn't underestimate the power of your team and from the top down reading books on certain subjects, because really good ones, although there's a time investment, I know we all want everything in 5 minutes and watch videos on 1.5 speed, but books can be a really cost-effective way to get just one tip. You spend £10 on a book, you get one tip that really makes a 0.5% improvement in your business, and that really is obviously cost-efficient. In terms of effective, the challenge with a book is, or in fact most learning, is about measurement. So really the most effective are ones that you can measure. And a measurement can be both objective or subjective. So subjective might be what trainers would call happy sheets. Did we enjoy the course? Was it great? And so on and so forth. But we tend to focus very much more on an objective measure, which is about converting what you've done into some kind of figure that says we've had an improvement. So then your other costs that you've got to consider, as well as whatever you're investing in the learning, is how much time it takes. So I would say that the most cost efficient methods are the ones that for every minute you spend, you get a measurable outcome. Now, if we're looking at limited resources, then I'm biased, obviously, but online is very, very cost effective and good stuff. And by good stuff, I mean things that aren't just a PowerPoint stuck online with a multiple guess quiz at the end. They are incredibly cost effective and measurable and, of course, repeatable. So that's that side. The other one is we do quite a lot of work with businesses whereby they're mixing coaching and mentoring. There's some incredibly good coaches out there, and they can really amplify whatever traditional training you've done by helping somebody change behavior. So I think look at how long it's going to take, look at the quality of it, but most importantly, look how you can measure the outcome, and then you'll know which is cost efficient for you and your team. And don't forget old stuff like books and things like that.
Yeah, because there are still libraries around, aren't there?
There
So
are those
you
things.
don't
Yes,
even
I
have
live
to
less
pay
than
for
200
them.
meters from one.
Yeah, exactly. So you can just go and get them. There's also, if you are time poor, I've used an app called Blink before. I'm sure there's others available too, that will literally read you a book in half an hour. So it will summarize it, and then you can decide whether you want to read the actual book going forward. So that's another really good one. But no, as you can see from up here, we like books in our office. A whole shelf across there is just full of books. And I've still got one that one of my old managers, and I still recommend it to people, which is Good to Great by Jim Collins. Yeah, but you only have to read up to a certain page. You don't have to read all of it. But yeah, it's about how to get your company to go from good to great. And it does resonate quite a lot.
Yes.
If you want something a bit more simple, then Who Moved My Cheese is the other one that I would recommend. So, and also you can get some really cute, cheesy things to go with it. So fab. Thanks very much for that, Pete. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. How does customer service training impact revenue growth in small businesses, and what key areas should be covered in such training?
Well, I suppose the simple answer is it should affect it enormously, because there's a very old saying, which I must admit still crops up every now and again, and somebody might say, what about if we train our people and they leave? They'll take all that skill with them. But then the flip side to that is, what about if we don't train them and they stay? So I think there's probably three key areas, because this is a big thing for us in terms of customer service. The first one in terms of areas is know the products and services. Often overlooked and assumed, whether it's a small business selling one simple product or a complex list of things that you're selling, you've got to know the products, because customers are looking to you to be an advisor. I read some very interesting stats recently, which I think is certainly borne out in that people these days don't want to talk to a salesperson until they're about halfway through the sales process, because there's a lack of trust. And people under 40 want to buy, 70% of them want to buy things without ever talking to someone.
Yeah.
So when they do finally talk to one of your team, they've really got to know their product. Now that might be somebody that's walking into a coffee shop or a store or a warehouse or something like that, or it might be somebody that's contacting you online. But you've got to know the products. So little and often, trying products, being experts in them, those are the organizations that benefit most. All organizations rather benefit a lot from making sure their team know their products and services. And how to differentiate them is probably another thing I should add. The other one then is basic sales techniques. And I love to be sold to. My dear father-in-law said to me, he was a brilliant salesperson. He said, I love to be sold to by a professional. He said, unfortunately, it's not often the case. And I think that's still borne out today. So the skills of listening, another saying, we've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. Being able to listen, being able to understand. A professionally skilled customer service person knows how to listen, understand, and make a really good recommendation or number of recommendations. So it's those communication skills. They're not sales skills, they're communication skills, and those are absolutely critical. And then probably a little bit overlooked, but possibly the most important, is having very skilled managers. Managers that can attract the type of people to your organization that you want, particularly if you're a smaller business, because you're not going to have many people. Everyone's going to have to count. Then they're going to have to motivate and support those people, keep them encouraged. We all have bad days, and support them and coach and mentor them. And then also retain them, because once you've upskilled them, those managers are absolutely key in retaining all the best people, so you attract more great people. So I would say product and service knowledge, absolutely key. Great communication, arguably the essence of all sales skills. Combining product knowledge with understanding what the customer wants is pretty much key. And then don't forget the managers. They're absolutely fundamental in holding the whole business together, and they should have superb people management skills.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. People management is kind of overlooked, especially in small businesses. I think it's not done necessarily on purpose. But if you've got a small business like I was when I first started, it was just me. And now I've got employees. You're expecting your employees to then manage people, but actually they might have the skill set in what you're doing, but they don't have that people management skill set. So therefore, that is something that you are going to have to teach or show or do with them in order to make sure that if you're spending time and resources on your team, then you don't have your manager who can't manage people, and people go, do you know what, I'm not sticking around here, I'm going to go. And that's when your turnover starts going, which then costs you money, and you don't get that consistency, and then the customer service starts to fall, and that's where you start to lose things. And I think especially with your platform, Pete, it's that consistency. So
Yes.
if you've got product stuff on there, if you've got customer service stuff on there, you can tweak it to make sure that it is actually reflected to what you're doing as a business. And most small businesses are quite unique, so they always have their nuances that they do, but you might forget to tell somebody that because you're growing your team or somebody else is recruiting, and that's not told or trained when they first start, at which point it gets lost in translation. So and I know that quite a lot happens with values and vision statements and stuff. You do them, it's all great, and the CEO stands up and says, this is what it is. And then a year down the line, you've grown as a business, but people don't actually know what these values are. So because it's not that consistency. So I think that is key too. Okay. Next question. How do you determine the training needs specific to your small business to maximize the revenue growth?
Well, this is a cracker because really the two are combined together and defining your strategy. I think particularly with a small business, it's very easy to have 100 things on the really important list. But if everything's important, nothing's important. Now, with larger organizations, as you know from experience, Kate, that you might have a 12 to 18 months training or learning strategy because the business is heading off in a certain direction. Even with the very large organizations we sometimes work with, up to 40,000 staff, all the way down to my local farm shop, who's one of our customers with just a couple of handfuls of staff. What they're looking at is, what are my now needs? So in terms of determining the training needs, figure out what the business needs. So if the business will always be facing challenges and opportunities, there's very few levers you can pull with business. You either increase income or you reduce costs. So it's really what you're looking to do as a business. Those are the things that you should map back to the skills. Coming back to the management training that we were talking about in the previous question, I had one customer who'd acquired a couple of other businesses. And I spoke to the CEO and he said, I know we've got all this great stuff we need to do, Pete, but at this moment in time, I've got to merge 3 cultures. So I need my managers to have great communication skills and adapt to change. So the thing I would say with that one is, if you're going to maximize your revenue growth, you'll have a strategy to do that. You might be improving your search engine optimization or digital marketing. You might be reducing costs and taking your manufacturing somewhere else. You might be looking at improving sales. Whatever the business is looking to do to maximize revenue and growth, then that's the skills that you should be giving your team. It's a very direct correlation, whatever size business you're at.
No, exactly. And I also think it's getting the buy-in from the teams as well. And that's where you're doing regular appraisals and things like that is really helpful. What do you struggle with? What do you not struggle with? And then you've got your champions of, they're really good at selling this product. If somebody's struggling with that one, why don't you go and talk to your peer about that and see how they do it? Because people learn, I think, better if they've got peer-to-peer rather than somebody that stood there talking to them about a product and how they should sell it when actually they've never been on the shop floor selling a product or doing anything. So from that perspective, I think that does help, and getting that getting trainers within the business, even if it's unofficial, so they can take charge and keep that on board and keep it moving, and they can then say, well, actually, we've done this now, we're now struggling with X, what can we do next? Okay, so how should small business owners allocate their training budget to maximize revenue generation outcomes?
I think you've sequenced them beautifully here, Kate, because it's directly related to the previous one. Is you put your money where you're trying to achieve the most. But I think there's a little bit more to it to consider than that. In that, um, when you're allocating budget, particularly if you're looking at quite a large spend, which all small businesses are very cautious with spend. In fact, all size businesses are.
Yeah.
I think I'm a big fan of doing a pilot, seeing what works in a very
Mhm.
short time span, measuring it and going, that really worked, or it almost worked, but we ought to tweak it.
Mhm.
So if you're going to allocate training budget, I would do it in very small chunks, pilot something.
Mhm.
If that had an impact, then multiply out what it would be if you
Yeah.
trained everybody or did it with everybody, and then go back round in that continual loop.
Mm.
Particularly, again, management training is typically going to take a little bit more time and more investment, but we often do courses as short as 6 minutes.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot in that. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, which links back to the very first question about buddying up and sharing knowledge within, don't
Mhm.
forget all the skills that people have got that maybe they're too busy to share with others. So if you can bring everything together, very defined period of time, do something, determine what you'd like the outcome to be,
Mhm.
and then measure if anything changed, then do more of the good stuff.
Yeah, no. And also I've done it previously, is although people don't like looking at them, looking at the complaints that are coming in, if you've got them coming in, and you can use that as a strategy of what people need to be trained on. So if
Mm.
people aren't communicating, or they're not listening to what you're saying, then those are the skills that you need to be looking at. Or the customer service, people ignored me, just go back to basics then, and start from a lower level and then move your way up. There's no point in, as they say, running before you can walk. So if there are things, but I found that previously, if you looked at sort of like the challenges and the complaints that might have come in, you can then see that. And it also helps with the team understanding, okay, I've done that training and we're getting less complaints about that. And there's that correlation between the two, and it's worthwhile doing the training. Because I sometimes think staff think, actually, what's the point in doing training? It's just because it needs to be done, which is not necessarily right. Okay, speaking of budgets, the next question was, are there any grants or funding opportunities or government initiatives available to support small businesses in implementing revenue generating training programs? So I'm going to answer this one.
Thank you, Kate.
So there is a lot around, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to find it. The most obvious one out there is the apprenticeship levy. So those that don't know what the apprenticeship levy is, I will send some more information out. But in a nutshell, if you have a payroll turnover of a certain amount of money, your company has to put into the apprenticeship levy. If you're under, which most small businesses are, then you can tap into that apprenticeship levy and get your team trained via apprenticeships. Now, what isn't known so much, which I found out about by an apprenticeship company, is that actually those people that have got the apprenticeship levy pots can actually give that money to other people as well. So if you're a small business, generally 95% of a cost of an apprenticeship is paid for. And you have to pay the other 5%. Now, depending on what the apprenticeship is, that can range from £100 to £4,000. So it just depends. So if you go into your apprenticeship levy pot online, then you can request funds from people that have got a levy pots. That's what I did with my guys that I've put on their CIPD level 3, and I got 100% funding. So I didn't actually have to pay anything. So £100 could be a lot to some small businesses. So it's really worthwhile going in and having a look about that. And if you want any questions on that, or you want to know how to do it, then please feel free to come back to me and I'll explain. The government do grants. So there's grants, Innovate UK. If you're doing research and development, then there are the R&D tax credit reliefs. If you're new to business, then there is entrepreneurs grants that you can get training for. You can also get air quality grants as well. So having a workplace that's got good air quality is going to help. So therefore, if you need that kind of grant. So from that perspective, I will put all of that information in with this as well. But if you are looking to do a grant, my suggestion would be is that you need to do a return on investment. So kind of like a business plan, but a business plan for your training. So what do you need? Why do you need it? How are you going to get there? And what's the outcome from it? Because if somebody can see that as a grant process, so the lottery still do quite a lot of grants as well, they will want to see that kind of information. They're not just going to hand out money to you willy-nilly. So it's really important to make sure you understand how much it's going to cost you, or how much grant you're asking for, and then what's the return on investment for that, and how's that going to benefit your business. Anything else from you on that, Pete?
No, I think you've covered that beautifully, Kate. And as I say, I mentioned to you earlier, it's not an area we have a great deal of expertise in. We just provide our stuff and clients use it, and some programs that are funded, but no, that's perfect.
LEPs are also good. LEPs are also good to go to as well. So your local, I want to say enterprise partnerships. So they often have loads of free funding available. I did an accelerator program for small businesses. And because that came out of the European funding, but who knows whether we'll still get that anymore. Then I did an accelerator course for 12 weeks based on how to make sure you're running your small business correctly. But it was worth about £4,000, I think, something like that. So from that perspective, it's always worth looking at your local colleges and universities and seeing what they're doing as outreach stuff as well. Okay, our next question. What are the key training needs that small businesses typically face when it comes to revenue generation?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of this already. Obviously, sales, service, management skills. But there was one other thing I thought I'd throw in here that we started seeing an increase in before COVID, but during COVID, it went just through the roof. And that's to do with well-being. We obviously have a whole range of courses on what you might consider physical well-being, which people call health and safety. But the whole idea of looking after somebody's mental well-being, or in Asia, they more like the term resilience. We've got clients there. But the reality is that if you want to have really productive team members that are operating at their best, that's going to have a profound impact on revenue generation. Over and above almost anything else, because if they're not performing and they're not feeling good, they're not going to deliver for the internal team and the customer. The other thing we've found with feedback from our wellbeing series of courses is that it's the sort of thing, I think perhaps specifically in small businesses where a team gels together, nobody wants to let the side down, and it's not easy to allocate time to do something that is perhaps seen as optional. And one of the things that we did when we worked with Mind on the courses, I was very conscious. I wanted to focus on the positive aspects to business rather than the lost days of work and a lot of the negative press that comes out. And there's some huge figures that get quoted, and they're very difficult to justify. So when we've looked at measuring the outcomes, we've looked at engagement, productivity, stress, and all of those other measures that say, okay, well, if we've addressed these and looked after our people, then they're going to perform better. The other knock-on effect of that clients have said is we find it easier to attract staff because people that are working with us are telling other people what a nice place it is, and they feel very well looked after. I know, with things like B Corps, there's a lot of organisations given a lot more thought to how they behave and look after their team. So I wouldn't underestimate the power of what looking after their well-being mentally as well as physically in actually revenue generation. Little bit like the management skills. It's sort of not tangible, but it's very important in making that work. So I think that's the other thing I'd pop into that question.
Yeah. We've been doing some financial awareness for employees at the moment as well, because of everything that's going on with cost of living. Because also, if you think somebody's worried about how they're going to pay the bills, their productivity is going to absolutely dip because they're not going to be 100% on the job. So actually, if they've got some practical things that you as an employer have given them to say, right, okay, we've got a financial advisor that you can go and have a chat to work out how you can do X, Y, and Z if that's what you want to do, then that will help, I think, as well. So I think I completely agree with you. Well-being is one of those really hot topics at the moment, but in sort of like a holistic view of kind of like everything. So your home life to your health to your financial well-being. So, but yes, okay. Next question. How can small businesses measure the ROI of their training initiatives focused on revenue generation?
Well, I have to say this is possibly a specialist subject for me, so much so, and I'm going to get a shameless plug in here. I actually wrote a book on it as
You
part of
did, and I've read your book. It's very good.
I've part of developing it. It's not overly complicated, but you have to put a bit of effort and thought into it. Just like you mentioned with business strategy earlier, and Good to Great and various other books that are out there. And really, it's about breaking each thing up and trying to isolate it, and then defining where you are before you started and where you are at the end of it. And there's one of the things that we always do on pilots is we never look at just the first couple of weeks, because frankly, I could go and shout at a lot of people and they'd probably change behavior for a very short period of time, but we want it to stick. So if you're measuring the outcome of any initiative you do, and you can isolate it, then it's really about saying, yeah, we're going to see a little blip in the first 2 weeks, but what's happened after 12 weeks? So the ROI should be after 12 weeks to show it sticks. Now, in terms of how you do it, I mentioned earlier objective and subjective. The subjective stuff is the most important question we ask everybody that does a course is, did you learn some skills you could use? So that's them telling you, not I enjoyed the course, which is also important, it was the right length or it was well written or I'd like to do more like it, but it's asking that question that says, what's this of any use to you in your role? The other then side, if you're doing, there's been a lot of questions about customer service and sales, you've got pure sales measurement, but you've also got the size of the sale or basket size or average transaction value. Are your sales for the same amount of effort, are they greater than they were before? You've also got to then look at in terms of how long is it taking to get that sale. So there's lots of things you can measure. Then you're looking at on the service side, I think most people are aware of Net Promoter, which is a way of starting to measure customer satisfaction. And again, you might say, okay, well, sales have increased, but what's our turnover of customers? Are they staying with us? And was that because the program we implemented actually was around making sure that when they bought, they stayed a raving fan, not just a sort of a happy customer. And that's another good book, Raving Fans, which I think is a bit old now, but that's that one. Now, in terms of managers, that's a really tough one, because it's not enough just to say I've sent them on a program and they can answer a load of questions on management theory or what a smart objective is. So what we did with that was we looked at what a good manager behaves like, and we broke it down into 69 behaviors under 7 competencies. And again, Kate, I can let you have the link. We've got a free download of that on our website. We took that round to about 100 clients and some consultants, and most said this has gone further than we thought, but they use it as a prompter, both in appraisals and various other ways, to just make sure that their managers are thinking about all the stuff they need to do. What we then did, we wrote an assessment which asked very realistic scenarios, and we measured each answer against each of those behaviors, and we did the same after the program. So if you're going to measure management outcomes, then you need to give a little bit more thought as to what their behavior is now and the areas that they need to improve or can work on. And as I mentioned earlier, those will be very much now needs. I was speaking to a CEO this morning who said, I won't describe it, but he got a particular set of needs that he knew his team could improve on, and it would have the biggest impact on the business. So you can actually measure that as a direct result of doing a program. The other thing is the ROI is easier to measure if you only do a subset of the business, because then you can isolate that if you've got a team of 20, 10 go on a particular program, or 3 of the 6 managers go on a particular program, you can see if they've improved what they're doing more than the people who didn't go on the program. There's a real added bonus of that then is those that do go on any program and it works, the others are then clambering for it rather than seeing it as a chore or I've got to do some training. So I think there's a lot in it, but fundamentally, make sure you define where you are before and try and find a measure. Ideally objective, something tangible that you can put into numbers, but also don't overlook the subjectivity. One of the other things you could do is ask the team if they feel invested in and more engaged, which is a particular important thing for millennials. and that will give you an indication of if what you're doing, and you have to decide if it was a good investment, if it's subjective, if what you're doing is creating the right impact on the team and the business.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think sometimes it's the ROI that's overlooked. It's kind of like, let's do this training course, but actually it's cost you this much, but what have you got out of it? And then the staff go, well, why can't I have a pay increase? You've paid for this training that I didn't want, and it's not done any good, and I'd prefer to have a pay increase. So we get that a lot in small businesses. Okay, so this is the final question of the ones that were asked previously. So what specific sales training programs or techniques can significantly improve revenue generation in small businesses?
Well, as we said earlier, I from my personal viewpoint, where I see the most success is not overlooking product knowledge, and that's something you can do internally.
Yeah.
You mentioned as well, just using your phone to video the people that are great at explaining a product is a very cost-effective way.
Yeah.
And then either put that on an internal Vimeo account or ideally into a training program of your own using a simple tool, because it's nice to assess, because then at the end of it, once they've watched something, you know that they weren't doing something else and they can answer some questions. So always measure, always assess any little thing you do. If we're going away from or trying to look at small businesses, cost effective, time, etc., there's some great stuff online. The one word of warning I give to any business owner is curate the content that you suggest your people look at. And exactly as we do within our team, get everybody motivated to go and try and find some stuff. TED Talks, there's some great stuff on there. There's a huge amount of free stuff on YouTube. There's also some great stuff on some of the big, the biggest global sales training companies. Put a lot of free stuff on their sites. There's a lot available for free, but curate it. Don't rely on everybody to go and find it for themselves, and don't rely on them to go and find and watch stuff that maybe isn't the way your company and your culture works.
Yeah.
So product definitely, and then sales skills. Sales has moved on. It's not the there's sort of how do I close sales is often a question. I'm a big believer in that the close is irrelevant. If you've done your job right, you've understood, listened, and you genuinely can meet that person's need, and you don't feel pressured to try and sell them or help them buy something really that they don't need, then what I would say is the close is easy if you've made a great recommendation. So actually, I'd be cautious of some more traditional sales approaches, because the world's moved on and we have to be a lot smarter in terms of doing that. So I'd say those are the particular programs. You can curate your own. You can make your own playlist on YouTube. Costs you nothing but your time. Don't forget books, podcasts in particular, some great podcasts out there. And then obviously you've got both face-to-face courses, which you can send your team on, or perhaps even online versions of that. And obviously, I'm very biased, but there's some great online courses.
Some really great online courses. I have to say that I've been working with a client just testing something out at the moment, which Pete knows about. So the people management course that upskill people do is great. It's set into different modules. And I've been working with just one individual at the moment just to understand how we might be able to use it as a business. So it's blended learning, because I believe in a lot of blended learning, which I know Pete does as well. And it's a case of you learn stuff, and then I then have a session with them afterwards to say, right, okay, what did you learn about this? And how could that be put into your current work position, and et cetera, et cetera. So they've got extra things to do. It's not literally going online, watching it. I have to say though, Pete, that you might need to do some more storylines, because the person's just finished and he's going to be really sad that he's going to finish the drama.
Series 2.
Yes. So he was just like, I'm quite sad. And I was like, no, it's fine. He'd quite happily have a sequel, I think. So just to let you know. No, we found that really good. And as a business, we're going to start hopefully utilising that people management and the coaching more in a structured way in order to help the small businesses with their people management, because it's a really great way of blended learning. Okay, so I've got the last slide, which is, do you have any other questions, anybody that is watching? Whilst I'm just waiting for people to type, is there anything else that you would like to highlight or say, Pete?
That's a very tricky. I suppose everything's been about revenue generation, and I guess really to not forget the importance of looking after your costs. Those are the two levers you've got with business. So you can obviously always look to generate revenue, but don't forget looking after the team and the people and their skills to keep your costs low. With a small business, it's a lot easier to have a team of people that spend money like it's their own, rather than in perhaps a bigger business where they don't tend to think like that. So yeah, there's lots of skills that you can give them. The finance one, which is a great part of well-being, and just teaching them about their own finances. But there's always lots of little things that you can look at. And then don't forget the big stuff. It's very easy as a small business to just think there's always so much to do, as you well know, Kate.
Yeah.
So it's really about focus on what's important and spend your training effort there. And it's not just the cost investment, it's the time investment.
Okay. So we've had one question in. So with regards to customer service training, is there any particular new things that have come out with regards to customer service training? Because personally, I think customer service training gets a bad rep. I think some of the apprenticeships that you can do in customer service are a little bit woolly. And actually, I don't know how they benefit the individual doing the apprenticeship. So from that point of view, the question is, what other areas of customer experience could people look at, I suppose?
I think probably the question about what's new. I alluded to it a little bit earlier in that I've seen organisations and businesses of every size are looking at the long-term quality of the relationship with the customer. Now, obviously, some things, you're on holiday, you wander into a bar and you buy a pint, and there's not a relationship there. But particularly with the amount of online e-commerce businesses where they're moving towards subscription models, organizations who realize it's a lot easier to retain a customer or create customer loyalty than get new ones. So actually, rather than thinking about sales and service separately, sales getting the client, service looking after them, it's completely blurred now. And actually the measure is not only what was the cost of acquisition for a client and what skills do we need to acquire the right clients, but also what do we need to do in order to retain that client? And we look at the lifetime value of them. So actually, in terms of sales and service, it's rather than just get the sales in or deal with that situation in service, it's about building the relationship over a longer period of time when you get loyalty. Yeah. And even if it's, with since TripAdvisor began, even if you're, as I say, you're on holiday and you're going and buy a pint somewhere, then actually, although you might think that's a one-off transaction that will get buried if we don't do it very well, it'll get put up somewhere. And you're much more like, for everyone that recommends you, you're probably more likely to get 10 that will complain. So I think the newer approach is to look more holistically at a sort of acquiring customers, retaining them, and then using them for referrals. I mean, still to this day, well over half our business is referrals, as I know yours is, Kate, because, people, your customers are very happy to refer you to others because you spend a lot of effort doing such a good job consistently. So I would say that's probably the big change in my many years of being on this planet that I've seen evolve.
Okay. Another question that's come in, and I think this is quite good for small businesses actually, what components would you include in a training session that's meant for both junior employees and managers? Because sometimes they might not be able to do 2 sets or buy 2 sets.
My initial reaction is I wouldn't, because you're being time inefficient. Because the more people you've got in a room, whether it's a meeting, even if you're standing up, and we've all heard of companies that take the chairs out so the meetings are shorter, etc. But I think if you've got people coming into a room with different levels of experience, different levels of knowledge, you're being inefficient. So, you and I have discussed this many times, and we're of the same opinion that a blended approach, which basically means mixing stuff together, works. So if there is a topic that both a manager and a junior person need to learn more about, for goodness sake, make sure that before you let them in the room, and I really do mean don't let them in the room, send them away, make sure they've done their prep work.
Mm.
And so with, almost every client we work with, they look at the prerequisites, and then before you're going to spend the most expensive investment is people's time and possibly travel if you're going to put them in a room together, make sure they've all got a good level of ground knowledge. So that might be simple as knowing acronyms or basic theory or
Yeah.
product knowledge. Then a really good facilitator, trainer, coach, whoever's going to be in the room with more than one person is really going to get the most out of that time, because they won't have to be going over stuff. It's a fact of life, and I've actually seen it, that you're in a room with half a dozen people, and some of them are looking at the phone under the desk, some of them are going a bit slower, some of them are way ahead and they're very experienced and they're bored. You've really got to think very carefully about putting people in a room together. Yeah. And if they have mixed experience and skill set, get everybody up to the point where you can get the most out of it. The flip side to that, and you alluded to it earlier with sort of buddying up, is you can turn that on its head. And if you've got some really good experienced managers in the room with some less experience, the managers can become part of the program themselves, because they'll be sharing best practice, and that can really, really work well.
Yeah, no, I've done that before with regards to doing fish training. Don't know if you.
Oh yes, I remember that. Yes, I do. Goodness.
And having a mixture of people in a room really did help. I remember that I once did, and I hated the terminology, crisis management training. It just makes you go in a panic every time you hear it. And it was when I was working within hotels, and I think people with lots of experience can still learn. I know I still learn every single day. And we did this crisis management training with obviously the people that needed to be in the room, but they were complete mixed abilities. And my question was, and they had to go and think about it, was that we were hosting a conference for a group of people that maybe other organisations or activists might not have liked the fact that they were going to be at our hotel. And we got an anonymous call to say they'd injected the chicken with antifreeze just as the meals were going out. What would you do? And it was the assistant maintenance manager that just the GM was just like, oh, sat there twitching his head like this, and everyone was sort of like, it went on for about 20 minutes, and then the assistant maintenance manager just went, why don't we just set the fire alarms off? At which point nobody needs to know anything about it. Oh no, your food's cold, we're going to have to go and create something different for you. There's no worry, there's no concern or hysteria, and we can just let the fire brigade know this is what's happened and this is why we've done it, and then they can sort of like go in on what's gone on. And the GM was just like, see, that's why I like doing these kinds of training programs, because I'm learning new things every day as well. Although it seems quite obvious, I didn't think about it. I was thinking complicated things. So from that perspective, I do think having other people in the room is good, but I agree with you. If it's to do with a subject knowledge, so a product, or say something on, I don't know what I would say, disability discrimination or something like that, then making sure people have got some base understanding and have done the prep work first in order for them then to join in with the conversations that we're talking about is essential. I 100% agree with you on that. And I've got one more question that's come through. How would you convince employees to take optional training courses?
That's a very good question. There's sort of, it's a what's in it for me, basically.
Yeah.
Most people are very busy, and particularly if it's optional and maybe you're asking them to do it outside of their normal working hours, my goodness, you're going to have a strong argument. One of the things which has actually absolutely blown me away is 3 weeks ago, we got accreditation for one of our courses by the management series that you mentioned earlier, by the Institute of Leadership and Management.
Oh,
and
wow.
Anybody that completes the courses gets their badge, but also can join as a member and get letters after their name. And I thought, is that really going to entice people? But to be blunt, it's gone bonkers, because people, it's really something that's in it for them personally. It's not the ABC company's training program. It's one that's recognized. And my goodness, I can put letters after my name, particularly
Yeah.
if, like me, you're not particularly academic. So you've got to think of some reason that it is worth their while doing that course.
Mm-hmm.
So you've generally got various, you can only do so much with a stick, but with a carrot, you've got to think about, will they benefit from it professionally from a business point of view? And if we're being blunt, will I earn more? The other one is, will I be more efficient and will my life be easier if I make a behavior change and deploy a new skill?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the, will it further my career, either within this organization or outside of it? And that's where an external accreditation or CPD points, which again, we have on our courses that we know are very popular. That's something else. Or are they skills that I can use in my personal life? And people would say health and safety, fire, and various other courses like that are quite dry. But what we did into ours was a lot of that area of looking after a business and your colleagues is all about taking ownership and having good negotiation skills and persuasive skills to those people in the team that don't want to take much notice. So we put some personal skills training about influencing and communicating with others into those courses, and those are the things we get the feedback on, because they go, these were really useful to me in my life outside of work. So I think it's a real tough call. There's lots of kudos around. If all of your peers are doing them, you don't want to be left out. So there's a little bit of peer pressure. There's, will it benefit me in my current job and going forward, being blunt into others? And there's, will I get some degree of recognition? The other thing that came back from studies, particularly around millennials, is they do like to work hard for something, because then the value is perceived as greater. So if you're going to ask people to do something, don't make it really easy, because then the value is diminished.
Yeah.
And so I think there's lots of ways you can do it, but it's a toughie, particularly if it's optional. If it's optional, it's got to be great as well. Obviously, that sort of goes without saying, but that's that other side to it. So yeah, that's where I would say they're toughie. But if it's good stuff and they perceive the value and you've sold it to them or marketed it to them, you wouldn't launch something, a new product or service from your business, without really good marketing. It's the same with anything that you're trying to get your team to buy into. I suppose I'd add one last thing to that is, if you've got a clear vision, as you mentioned earlier, values and strategy, and everybody's behind you trying to achieve that as a small team, and if you can relate whatever you're asking them to do to helping them achieve that goal and making them more likely to, then it all adds up and the sum's greater than the parts. So think about that bigger picture rather than just plonking an optional training program in and going, come on, guys, everybody's got to do it, please.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. So
you're very welcome.
As promised, here is details about Pete if you wanted to get in contact with him, and then also ours too. A quick question: if somebody wanted to get your amazing book, which I was lucky enough to get given a copy of, if they wanted to get one, how would they get one?
You can get it on Amazon, also on Audible. And if you head over to our website, you can get it there. But what I'll do, I'll send you, so you can put in the notes to the video or whichever way you communicate this, I'll send a link to the free download for the behaviours and competencies that we've defined for managers. We've also got a great booklet on well-being, which has got some stuff about measurement in. And on the book page, there's also a link to a load of recommended books and other stuff that might interest you. So I'll send those over to you, or get in touch with that, or get hold of me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Pete. The last thing before I say thank you to Pete is just to let you know about our next webinar, which is going to be on the 19th of June. And it's about how HR systems can help small businesses attract and retain top talent Q&A. And that's with the lovely Natalie from Breathe. So we might also have somebody else coming on board that one as well, from their sister company, Elmo. So that should be a good one too. So final thing from me is thank you so much, Pete, for coming on and having a chat and helping answer these questions.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Kate.
And I hope you have a great rest of the week and another long weekend.
You too.
All right. Take care.